Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to explore something new.
Well, today we're going to be tackling a topic that's both ancient and surprisingly relevant to our modern lives.
Sounds intriguing. I'm all ears.
We're going to be looking at the philosophy of Tsukahara Bokuden. Ever heard of him?
The name rings a bell. Wasn't he a famous Japanese swordsman?
Yeah, he was a legendary swordsman who lived in Japan during a period of almost constant warfare. But what really made him stand out was his unique approach to combat.
Okay, I'm definitely interested now. What made his approach so unique?
He believed in winning without using his sword.
I know it sounds like a paradox, right? Especially for swordsmen. He called this concept mutakatsu.
Mutakatsu, winning without hands, huh? That's fascinating. I'm guessing that's why you said this is relevant to our modern lives.
Exactly. We have a real treat today because we have an expert on Bokuden's teachings joining us to, well, help us understand just what the heck mutaratsu really means. Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I have spent a lot of time studying Bokuden's philosophy. And you're right, mutakatsu is much more than just a cool-sounding phrase. It's actually a profound way of approaching conflict and achieving victory in any situation, whether it involves actual swords or not.
Okay, I'm already hooked. So tell me, what's the deal with mutakatsu? How did Bokuden actually put this idea into practice?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that Bokuden was a product of his time. As I mentioned, Japan was in a state of almost constant warfare during his lifetime, so swordsmanship is a highly valued skill.
Right, it makes sense that in that kind of environment, a swordsman would be pretty focused on, actually using his sword to win fights.
Exactly. But Bokuden saw things differently. He believed that true mastery wasn't just about physical skill, it was about cultivating the mind. He believed that a warrior's true strength resided in their ability to assess situations, outmaneuver their opponents, and even avoid conflict altogether if possible.
So, like, he was playing 4D chess while everyone else was stuck on checkers.
That's a great way to put it. He was always thinking several steps ahead, always looking for the most strategic and, ideally, the most peaceful way to resolve a situation. He wasn't afraid to fight, but he saw it as a last resort.
Do we have any stories that illustrate how he actually did this?
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of stories about Bokuden's cleverness and his ability to use his mind to outwit his opponents.
Mm,
In fact, there's a really famous one that perfectly illustrates this concept of mutakatsu.
I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
Well, the story goes that Bokuden was once challenged to a duel by another skilled swordsman. Now, most swordsmen in his position would have accepted the challenge without hesitation, eager to prove their prowess in battle. But not Bokuden.
He took the Mutakatsu route.
Precisely. Instead of accepting the duel, Bokuden calmly informed the challenger that his sword had no blade.
Wait, what? He just straight up lied.
Well, it wasn't exactly a lie, it was more like a clever maneuver. You see, Bokuden knew that refusing to fight would be seen as cowardice, so by claiming his sword was bladeless, he found a way to decline the duel without damaging his reputation.
Wow, that is pretty clever.
Yeah.
So he basically talked his way out of a fight without even drawing his sword.
Exactly. And the best part is that it worked. The challenger, completely baffled, had no choice but to back down. After all, what was the point of dueling a man with a bladeless sword? It would be like bringing a knife to a gunfight.
I can just imagine the challenger standing there thinking, did that just really happen?
I bet it was a brilliant example of Bokuden using his wit and strategic thinking to avoid unnecessary conflict. It also highlights a crucial point about mutakatsu. It's not about cowardice. It's about choosing your battles wisely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So for Bokuden, true strength was really about being able to control your emotions, think strategically, and achieve your goals without resorting to violence. It really does sound like that 4D chess thing again.
Exactly. He was a master strategist who understood that there's always more than one way to win. And often, the most effective way is to avoid fighting altogether.
This whole mutakatsu thing really reminds me of Sun Tzu's famous quote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting."
That's a great connection, and it shows that this idea of swordless victory isn't limited to one culture or time period. It's a universal principle that can be applied to all sorts of conflicts, not just physical battles.
So how can we apply this to, everyday life? It's not like we're all samurai warriors facing off in duels.
True, but think about it. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we could avoid conflict altogether if we just took a moment to think things through? Or if we approach things differently? Whether it's dealing with a difficult coworker, negotiating a deal, or even just having an argument with a friend, Bokuden's principles can be incredibly helpful.
So you're saying that Mudokatsu is like a life hack for navigating conflict.
Exactly. Instead of always charging headfirst into every problem, we can learn to use our minds as our greatest weapon. Instead of going for the knockout punch, we can look for ways to de-escalate, strategize, and maybe even find some common ground.
It's like Mudokatsu for everyday life. And wouldn't you say that this kind of mindset is especially important in today's world where everything feels so polarized and confrontational?
Absolutely. It seems like everywhere you turn, people are at each other's throats. Online, on the news, even in our personal lives. But Bokuden reminds us that there's power in staying calm, thinking clearly, and choosing our battles wisely.
It makes you wonder, how many swordless victories could we achieve if we all just adopted a little bit of Bokuden's philosophy?
It's definitely a question worth considering. Maybe instead of always trying to win every argument, we could focus on really listening to the other person and trying to understand their perspective. Maybe instead of getting swept up in the heat of the moment, we could take a deep breath and look for a more creative solution.
It's like that old saying, you can win the battle but lose the war. Sometimes stepping back from a conflict can actually be the most strategic move you can make. So much wisdom in this guy's teachings, even though he was writing centuries ago.
Absolutely. And that's what's so remarkable about Bokuden's legacy. Even though he lived in a time so different from our own, his ideas are still relevant today. He reminds us that true strength isn't just about physical power. It's about mastering our minds, thinking strategically, and finding ways to live in greater harmony with ourselves and the world around us.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Tsukahara Bokuden and his swordless victory philosophy, I want to leave our listeners with a thought to ponder.
Ooh, I love a good thought-provoking question. What do you have for them?
Well, we've talked a lot about how Bokuden's ideas can help us navigate conflict in our personal and professional lives. But I think the real challenge is figuring out how to apply them on a larger scale. How can we use Mudokatsu to address the conflicts that are dividing our communities, our nations, and even our world? That, my friends, is something worth thinking about. I couldn't agree more. All right, everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.